Hello, and thank you for choosing OKTV's Alternatives, a public access forum for expressing views and topics rich with the flavor of nonconformity. I'm Al DiGiacomo, your host for this evening's program. And tonight we feature the unique ceramic designs of artist Donna Hall. For over a decade, Donna has been creating new and innovative pieces by reworking original bodies of clay and experimenting with new techniques to produce pieces that are truly one of a kind. Donna, thank you for welcoming us to the Piermont Fine Arts Gallery.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It's always a pleasure to be here in Piermont.
Thanks.
What was your first experiences on how you got into ceramic design?
Well, I worked in a ceramic studio from the time I was about 15 years old, so that was my first experience with ceramics and creating.
And what drew you to this very non-conforming style of ceramic design?
Well, after working in the ceramic studio for so long, it was, working with basic molds and doing your, regular three-glazing or your, basic painting on pieces. So what I started doing is I would take a piece, for instance, a vase, and I would take it while it was wet, and I would, rip down the edges and maybe take another piece of clay and roll it out and tear the edges, and then I would stick it on with a little bit of slip. And I started, creating different shapes and forms and starting my own little style going.
Did you start off as in architectural design, or is this all self-led, self-taught?
It's more or less self-taught.
That's wonderful. So this little thing inside of you just says, "Go here."
It does. It's pretty spontaneous, my work. I usually don't have a plan for a piece that I'm making unless I'm making it special for someone. I just really kind of go with the flow and take a piece and just work on it. And if I find an interesting object that I think, I want to put in my piece, I'll either work it into the clay before I fire it, or I'll, epoxy it on at the end. Or I'd like to find different unusual fixtures or beads or stones or wires and work that into my pieces.
Shapes and things that just attract to your eye?
It's shapes, it's colors, it's textures.
Does it relate to also the type of mood that you may be in, or does your mood reflective on the shapes and objects that you're finding?
I would say my mood reflects on the pieces. I mean, I never know what I'm going to turn out in a piece until I'm working on it. So I could do one piece one day, and it's going to look totally different of starting on another piece the next day. So it's really, I guess, the frame of mind I'm in, or the creative mood that I'm in when I'm working.
You also have these vivid colors and glazings to your work. How do you get that type of effect? Take this blue bowl that you have here. The blue is flat, and you have these very shiny kind of glazing on it. Could you tell us a little bit about this piece?
Well, this piece, what I do with my pieces is I work with an airbrush. And, when you work with an airbrush, you get, this piece is a solid color, but with another piece, the colors flow and blend into each other, and the paints are opaque that I use, so the colors come through when you're applying, colors on top of each other. With this particular piece, this is sprayed on, and this is matte. It's not glazed. This piece is glazed. It would be the same color, and it's coming out different because I'm putting a glaze on top of it. I'm also adding, on my last firing, I'm adding pieces of broken glass, and this is blue glass, and what I do is I stick them on, and with glass you never know really how it's going to come out in the kiln, because it's just, as you can see, it's dripping. Here's a little piece that just hung off the bottom, and you kind of see where the drip is ending. So it's interesting because, you know, with a piece like this, I never know what it's going to look like until it comes out of the kiln.
And it is a true piece of spontaneous art here, because you say it never knows what it's going to turn out to. You had mentioned something about the firing, about how many times it was fired. What is meant by that?
Well, when you have a piece that's in its clay form, I paint on top of it when it's still, it's called greenware, so it hasn't been fired yet. It's breakable, and I spray my underglaze on top, and then I fire it. So that's the first firing it gets, which is the temperature's a little hotter than the second firing. The second firing is when I add my glaze on top, and then I add the glass. And sometimes if I'm not completely satisfied with my piece, I'll add a little more color and maybe add a little more glaze, and then I'll refire it again. Sometimes I've fired a piece maybe 5, 6, 7 times if I'm not happy with how it came out.
Is there any limit to how many times you can rework a piece?
Sometimes maybe it will crack, but that may end up being a part of the piece that I like, and maybe I'll, you know, stick a wire through the crack and twist it through. So really, I don't think there's a mistake that I can make with my pieces, because they turn into something that I
can see the one in the far back onto my right here. There's pieces of tubing and beautifully cut holes in there. Could you tell us a little bit about that piece there?
Well, this piece I airbrushed. I used maybe 6 or 7 colors in that piece, and when it was wet, when it was in a wet form, what I did is I cut the pieces out, and sometimes I just cut a little hole and then I end up just ripping it, and that's why you have the jagged edges along here. And after it was fired, I went over and glazed some of the areas. Like this here is also a matte smooth finish, and this here is a little bit shiny, but I used a tool to dig into that to give it a different texture.
Right.
And then I'm not sure where I got the wire from. It may have been, you know, when I had a faucet replaced or something, I kept the wire. And
you've also mentioned to me that there are no mistakes in your craft, in your field of work that you're creating yourself. Could you kind of follow up on what is meant by that? There are no mistakes?
Well, my pieces, if there's a, you know, as I'm bending them or reshaping them, sometimes a crack forms. Well, that's part of my work, where somebody else would, you know, think that it's not okay to have a crack in a piece. That's part of my work, where maybe it's a mistake to somebody. It's part of my work. I had, actually I have the piece here, maybe we'll look at it later. I had a piece that was a vase, and I was carrying it in from somewhere, and it dropped, and a piece broke off the bottom, but I wasn't going to get rid of it. I was going to make it into something else. So what I did is I turned it around, and I worked with it for a while, because this particular piece I had painted, and I really wasn't satisfied how it was coming out. So I kept working on it and adding color until I got it to the point where I liked it, and I put a light fixture underneath it, and that became my my light fixture. So.
Do you use a potter's wheel in a traditional sense with your work? For
these pieces, no, I don't. I have worked on a wheel, and with a wheel, I think you have to be more accurate, and you know, it's very hard. It's not easy to work on a wheel, and you have to build a.
It looks rather simple. A little centrifugal force, a little water, a little clay.
No, it's not, because usually what happens, especially when you're starting out, it flops. I like that when it flops. That looks more like my pieces than having a perfect vessel or a perfect vase. I like, you know, a slanted side, or I like something that's a little offbeat.
Very, very nice. Well, I think what we can do is to actually start to view some of the other pieces that we have inside the Piermont Fine Arts Gallery here, and we will talk about some of the other pieces as we return. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, here we are in the studio with Donna Hall, and Donna is going to show us some of the objects that she uses to decorate her ceramics, and some things that are in mid-creation. Donna, I see you like to work with pieces of rocks and stones. What's the significance behind that? Is it lead you on a search for different objects to use?
Yeah, I'm always looking for different things to use in my pieces. I'll find a copper screening or wire, and I like the different textures and the colors that will work with the pieces after I've painted them.
And these are some works that have just been come out. They've been fired.
Yes, this one's been. I airbrushed it when it was clay, and I had added some rocks in before. And I fired it, and now I basically was going to try to add a little bit, because to me it's really not finished. So, you know, for instance, I could take some of the copper screening and, you know, maybe stick it inside the jar, which will give it another look and another texture inside, and maybe take something like a grapevine, and as long as it bends good, so that I can maybe shove it in here and see what happens.
And you'll just keep fiddling with the piece until it pleases you, and then you're done.
Yes.
That's great. I see you have some other unfinished works inside the back there. I see the one that looks like it's been like a bag that's been collapsed there. Mm-hmm. Why is that clay gray and the piece below it pink, and the one closest to you a little bit more on the beige tan side?
Okay, well this piece, well actually all of them, or this piece and this piece, it's a different clay that I used. And this hasn't been fired yet, so I mean basically if you scraped it you could see it will, it's not very hard. Mm-hmm. And this piece was fired at a lower temperature than this piece was fired at. So this piece is actually very strong. It was fired at a very hot temperature.
And was that the same clay you said?
Yeah, this is the same clay as this one. As this piece here. So even the firing changes the color of the clay if it's fired at a different temperature.
That's great. Now, when you go looking for some of these things, is it just something that catches your eye? Some of the stones that you have here, you like working with turquoise and things like that?
Yeah, basically, I find interesting objects that I just feel like the color or the shape or the texture will work with one of my pieces, and I basically just collect these pieces, and then after I make a piece at this point, I'll look at my different objects and see what will work with this piece for me.
And how, you said that these are fired in a kiln?
Yes.
How hot does the kiln get to cure the clay?
For this particular clay, I would say about 1,800 degrees or maybe 2,000 degrees.
What would be a difference for another type of clay where you would go either higher or lower temperature?
Well, for this type of clay, it would be a lot hotter because it will make the piece stronger. And if I was going to add, I'm looking for a piece up here I have, but if I was going to add maybe gold on it or silver or mother of pearl, it would go at a lower temperature, because if you put it at too high of a temperature, it would burn right off. So it's basically what kind of paint you're using, or if you're using, you know, certain types of overglazes.
Is it possible to overcook the clay?
Yes, it is.
Where it would just crumble or
well, it could sometimes. Brittle? I've had pieces that have warped. You know, maybe if I was doing a plate, it warped, but it really wouldn't become too brittle because it's getting harder, the clay. So.
I see. And you use regular household tools, anything that will accomplish what you're trying to illustrate in your mind. I love that about an artist, where you have a brush that has some steel wires to it. It looks like you've maybe found that in an old hardware store someplace, and it looks and that would just rips into the clay, and you go,
exactly.
I like that.
For instance, in this piece right here, you can see when the clay was wet, I dug in and scraped it and came up with this texture in here.
Great. Now, you had specified that you work with molds. I guess we could maybe take a little a pause now, and maybe we can see some of those.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
And as we said before, Donna works with her ceramics by using a mold. Donna, let's take a look at that mold as we start to go into what you're working on now. Is that a two-piece?
Yes.
In two sections there, and then it's joined?
Yes. This comes apart, the mold, and as you can see, the shape is inside, so it's held together with bands. And
okay.
There's a liquid clay that gets poured in. Actually, this piece came from another mold that did not look like this. And basically you pour the liquid clay in, and it gets set up for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. It sticks to the inside of the mold because it's porous.
And you just mold this with the inside with your hand? How do you sculpt the inside of the piece?
It's all sculpted within the mold. As you're pouring it in, the clay sets up and sticks onto the outer edge of the piece, or actually the inside, and then you pour out the liquid clay. So what you have left basically would be this piece that would come out of the mold.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, so we end up with something like this, and you have your little, where would you go with this? You're using water, and what's your next step in a creation here?
Well, I would take some, another piece of clay that had, maybe a scrap from another piece, and I would flatten it out a little bit, maybe take, a tool with some prongs on it, and maybe scrape into that to give a little texture. Maybe take this piece, which actually I don't really even know where this came from.
May I see that?
It's some kind of a tool.
It looked like a drum key, but it's not.
Oh, okay. And I'm not sure what it is, but actually you could take, you can take the form in here and make a little indent around here or into the piece that I've just flattened out, and then I take my liquid slip and I apply it to the piece.
Liquid slip is?
It's slip is the clay that goes inside here, and this is the slip. It's called slip. It's a liquid clay.
Okay.
So I'm taking a little bit of this to
give it some adhesion.
Yes, to add on to here, and basically that's where I come up with my design or whatever. I just kind of work as I go and add pieces, and maybe I build the piece up to make the edge a little bit higher. Or I could take, if I wet it down a little bit, I mean, you can work with the piece, maybe dent in the side. So it ends up being a form in my hand, and maybe, for instance, like that piece, you could take it and maybe rip a hole into it. Well, I'll take the piece off, and maybe I can use this piece somewhere else. Add it to another piece. I could dip it into the slip and add that on there. And maybe I'll build up a neck around this piece to maybe make it a little bit higher. So as you can see, that's how I work along.
Yeah, all these unique little tools, and everybody has seen these fine, neat little things around the house where it just makes an interesting little mark or something like that, and you use them. And I just saw you using your hands on that clay, and I just saw that whole connection between the artist and like the work there. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
And then you would just keep building it. You wouldn't decorate it with these stones or anything while the piece is in this degree, would you?
Well, actually I can. There are certain stones. I haven't really experimented with these stones yet, because I don't know what will happen to them when they're in the kiln, but I will try them out. And for instance, if I was going to take a stone like this, I would take a piece of the clay and maybe dip it into the slip and add a piece onto here, and then I would take one of my tools and maybe cut a little hole in here, and I'll dip my rock into the slip and I'll add it into the piece, so now it's part of my piece. Now basically the rock, depending on what kind it is, sometimes the rock will burn up in the kiln.
It'll change color.
It will change color.
The minerals and the content of the stone will.
Yeah, sometimes it may dissolve. So this one I'm not sure with yet. I may do a little test, and because I found these on the beach, so I don't know, what type of rocks they are, stones.
If there's moisture that's caught inside the clay or inside the rock, does that have any kind of an effect when you're firing the piece?
Well, you have to let the piece dry out pretty good before you, the piece. This piece will look like this when it's dry.
How long would that take?
A couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Depending on the thickness or
well, depending
humidity?
on the thickness and depending on where you have it. If you put it in a room that's warm, it's gonna dry out a little bit quicker. If it's down here in my studio, it might be a little cooler, so it won't dry out as quick. Or I can leave it on top of the kiln if I'm firing something else, because then it will be hot and it will heat up and dry out quicker.
Well, that was beautiful. Just watching that one kind of generic looking vase just kind of take life right before my eyes here, Well, I want to thank you so much for allowing us to come into your studio here and to see some of the works that are in progress here.
Thank you. Thank you, Al.
We hope that you've enjoyed viewing these unique ceramic designs of artist Donna Hall. I would like to once again thank the Piermont Fine Arts Gallery for allowing us to present the show. If you have any questions or comments about our program, or if you would like to share your talent on our forum, please contact us. We'd like to know how you feel. So that's all for now, and congratulate yourself for taking the first step towards nonconformity by watching Alternatives. For OKTV Productions, I'm Al DiGiacomo.